Hi, good morning.
My name is Tammy, and this is Alex, and we're going to talk to you about checklists this morning. And just to give you a little bit of context, Alex and I are leaving in 9 hours to go to New Zealand, and we'll be gone for quite some time. During that time, my listing in Seattle and his listing in San Francisco have many bookings. So we have really had a large incentive to perfect the art of checklists and hosting remotely. So it's a topic that I hope we're well versed and well prepared to talk with you about.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a few of us have actually met before. I'm sort of seeing people coming into the chat room right now. This all started in Paris actually 4 months ago when Tammy and I gave a presentation on the Remote Superhost on how to manage operations remotely and still make your guests feel as if they're actually being hosted by a real host and by someone like that is with them on the property. In Paris, we talked about 27 tips. There was sort of a very long presentation or like lots and lots of different ideas on how to make your guests feel like they're being hosted when you can't actually be there yourself. Today, we're going to try to drill down on one specific topic, which is checklists, which has helped us quite a bit on actually managing our location remotely. So we'll wait for another 2-3 minutes. We'll probably get started in 3 minutes. We're seeing people are coming in right now. If anybody has any questions, we have Adrian who's assisting us. She's going to be in the chat room and she's feeding the questions straight through us. What we'll do is we'll go sort of 10 minutes at a time, and then as we see that questions are coming in, we'll just take them in blocks. Yeah, so I'll just wait for another 2 minutes for a few more of you to come in. Quick check, first and foremost, can everyone hear us? Let me actually look at the chat. If a viewers can just type really quickly yes, so I know that you can hear me.
It'd be great to know where people are tuning in from as well.
Okay, yep, we're seeing quite a few yeses. Alejandro, where are you coming from? Awesome, great. Stockholm, New York, welcome. Vancouver, Minneapolis, awesome. Great. Awesome. No, I think that's great. It looks like everybody can hear us, and so without much further ado, let's just get started. So as we said at the beginning, today is about checklists, and it's specifically about 2 topics: how to structure checklists, and then giving you a couple of ideas on how we run our own checklists to manage turnover operations remotely. Again, for those that are just joining now, what we'll do is just type your questions into the chat. Adrian's assisting us. She's going to pick up questions. And what we'll do is we'll take most of them at the end. And if something is unclear in the middle, just let us know and we'll pick questions up as they come in.
And many of you wrote in with topics that you were interested in for this webinar. So there will be some that we've reviewed all that, and there might be some that we won't cover today because this is more specific to checklists. But lots of those questions that we want to talk about today are covered in our first presentation, which you can find on the Airbnb YouTube channel. And there are a couple questions that we're not familiar with, so you can post those and we'll try to find you resources for those things.
Great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to switch over to screen share, and it's always a big jump. So let's hope that works. So in a second, you should see our presentation. And again, at this point, I can't see the chat anymore, but Adrian will be monitoring it. Let's get started on the intro slide, which you will wonder, what in the world are we doing with a woman sitting on the beach with snorkels? What does any of that have to do with checklists and managing your vacation rental, your Airbnb remotely? This is, I think, kind of the dream that many of us have, that we don't have to be at our listing all the time anymore, that we can relax, we can sit on the beach, we can spend time with family, we can get the freedom that we'd like to have from this very, very flexible job without having to worry. So this is kind of the inspiration. We're going to start with this and we're going to end with this.
And we also like to talk about that there are lots of reasons that people may want to have this kind of a system in place. If you're someone, when I first started hosting, I had a full-time job, and so there were times that when I could, I managed my listing on my own, but when I was at work or had a late meeting, someone else was doing that for me. I know that now that I've got a checklist in place, if I were to be called, away on an emergency, I'm set up. if I'm traveling to see family. So even if you're not someone whose plan is to be able to be traveling, while you're hosting, if you're more, based near your listing, it's still a really good idea and peace of mind to have this system in place.
All right, so before we get started, I wanted to point you through a couple of resources. You don't have to take notes because everybody will get access to the slides that we're showing here. We'll also be uploading a video of this presentation soon that has a little bit more detail. We do have a checklist template for you. That's sort of the beginning of the checklist that we are using. And then lastly, we have a checklist tool. It's a free application that basically allows you to do interactive checklists on any smartphone or any tablet, both Android and iOS. That's entirely free. We're working with Airbnb, and Airbnb is helping us to distribute that in a number of countries right now, and we'll be expanding to many more countries soon. All of the above you can get at getproperly.com. So that's the resources that go with this quick webinar, and we'll show you that again at the end. So really quickly, by way of presentation.
So as I said, I'm Tammy, and I am from Seattle, Washington. I'm originally from Montana, but I've been in Seattle for the last 20 plus years. And I started hosting on Airbnb sort of on a whim a bit over 2 years ago, and really found that I loved the experience. I loved meeting guests. I loved that guest relationship. I love sharing my home with people. The listing that I have is my entire home when I'm away. And so I think in the time that I've been hosting, I've had over 100 groups in my home, and I've just had a really great experience. I met Alex at the first Airbnb Open in 2014. And a few months later, we started dating. And so now we're hosting even remotely even more often, because we're either in San Francisco or Seattle or at his place in New Zealand. So we've really had to get really good at hosting remotely.
And that's kind of where the checklists come in. My experience was the following. I had a full-time job, actually still have a full-time job when I started hosting. So a very typical scenario for me was that there would be a very tight 4-hour turnover. Guests leaving at noon, the next set of guests coming in at 4 o'clock. In that period of time, I often ended up getting different cleaners because I have very frequent turnovers. The company that I worked with would send me different cleaners almost all the time. So I'd have someone brand new that basically had never been to my place before, and in 4 hours had to a very complicated turnover process. Complicated because it's a 3-bedroom house, two bathrooms, a hot tub, a couple of complicated appliances like a coffee machine that needs to be refilled. And it was particularly the small touches, the sort of the hospitality touches, like making sure that there's coffee beans in the coffee machine, that all the soap canisters are refilled, that the towels are hung in a certain way. Those are the things that are very important to me. So I started thinking, how can I manage those things remotely without actually being there? And how can I save myself and the cleaner from a lot of confusion, and in my case, from sitting in a meeting and then getting interrupted by a cleaner showing up at my house and just not knowing what to do. So we started, Tammy and I started using checklists extensively, and that's obviously the purpose of today's webinar. If you need to reach us with any questions, like our email addresses are on this screen, feel free to ping us at any time. We'll be very unresponsive for the next 48 hours because, as Tammy said, we are heading off to New Zealand, but as soon as we land there, we'll be answering emails again. So if you just bear with us a little, feel free to ask us any questions that you like and contact us directly. Really quickly, to give you a little bit of background on our listings, this is my house in San Francisco, where Tammy and I spend most of our time right now. It's, as I said, both of us are superhosts. You sort of get a little bit of an idea. It's a fairly intricate place. There's lots of electronics, lots of things to take care of. And I also have some very specific ideas on how I'd like my place to be staged.
And this is my home in Seattle. It's a 2-bedroom. It's the top of a 1905 cottage. So it's a 2-bedroom home, and it's fully stocked. And I often have up to 4 guests in my home.
And then lastly, this is sort of our early attempts at glamping. This is our place in New Zealand, where the complication is actually not so much cleaning the place, but putting the tent up and sort of getting everything ready for guests. And we have a full checklist and process for that. So those are our three listings. So let's jump really quickly into the overall context. As I started alluding to at the beginning, this is really part 2 of our Remote Superhost presentation. Part 1 we gave at Airbnb Open in November. And in part 1, we talked about 3 topics. We talked about how to connect with your guests through communication, how to use design and particularly design the guest experience effectively to sort of bridge the gap, the distance between you and guest. And then the third part was about on operations, where we talked about access and technology, we talked about checklists, and we talked about restocking and approaches to that. So today we're going to focus on just operations and just checklists. So that's the context. If anybody is interested in the bigger picture in the Remote Superhost presentation, just go to the Airbnb channel and you'll find it there on YouTube.
And with that presentation, what's also available, because there were some questions previously about smart locks and those kinds of things. So we have a full, about a page and a half of resources of those kinds of things that are available that you can access.
On the topic of access and technology, we're getting lots and lots of requests about that. I'm a complete technology geek, so my house is full of anything from door camera to August smart locks to a Nest remote thermostat to like anything you can imagine. So we will be doing a specific webinar on that topic very soon to walk you a little bit through the technology options around managing your house remotely. But today it's about checklists. So let me talk about the 4 objectives that we'd like to accomplish today. We've been using checklists really for 4 main purposes. The most important one for us, checklists save us time because they allow us to create a process once and then share it with any resource effectively without having to recreate the same process again and again, and be much, much better in actually executing against that process. The second thing that we'd like you to get out of this is checklists have been invaluable for us to communicate better, to make sure that if there's a language gap between us and the hospitality assistants, between us and the cleaner, we can bridge that gap. Checklists are a really good way of being clear and effective and concise, and then getting feedback from the cleaner that something was actually completed. The third topic, and that's sort of been the big bonus surprise for us, is we think checklists are great at managing details. The basic cleaning process that we all go through, I think, is really standard, and cleaners are very, very good at doing that. It's the hospitality details that I think make all the difference. The bottle of champagne in the fridge, refilling the coffee beans in the coffee machine, making sure that we take care of special guest requests, like, for instance, they're gluten intolerant and they'd like something other than granola for breakfast. It's those little things that I think people really care about, and I think checklists are a great way of managing that. Managing your clean in such a way so they can actually take care of these things. And then the last and most obvious one is it gives us peace of mind because we know that something was done. Really quickly, the structure of today's presentation, we'll talk about first the 3 purposes of checklists. The second topic we want to discuss is how you can customize a checklist. A checklist is only as useful as it is relevant to the audience. So we'll show you a couple of tricks on how to create one master checklist and then basically create versions of that that are specific to the cleaner and to the occasion. Third, we'll talk about good ways of organizing your checklist. Fourth, we'll cover how a visual checklist, how using pictures in your checklist can actually add another dimension to it and be a very effective tool at better communication. Fifth, we'll give you a couple of tips and tricks on how to actually build one. It can be a very daunting process, so we'll propose a more modular approach to that. Then we'll quickly wrap up, and then at the end, we'll show you a number of examples from our own checklists. And we'll hope to go through this in about half an hour. So we'll try to get to it as quickly as we can. If I talk too quickly, which I always do, just type something into the chat room, and Adrian's going to wave wildly, and I'm going to try to slow down. All right.
And a couple of the other requests in the what people sent prior to the webinar were asking questions about how to actually set up your checklist using the Properly app. And so we'll talk about that in a sort of a broader context. But there are also resources. Alex's company has lots of resources available to walk you through that process if you need help once you start building your own visual checklist. So there are videos on the Properly YouTube channel. And there's always, they're a very tiny company in terms of number of people, but there's always someone available to answer questions. They're really good at customer service. And the process of building the visual checklist can seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but it's actually quite simple, and they provide lots of resources to help really, I needed a lot of hand-holding in it to get started initially. So just know that we won't cover some of those specifics in this webinar, but those resources are really readily available.
So let's jump into very, very briefly a history of checklist. The sort of first idea of checklist came around, sort of formal checklist came around in the 1930s, and obviously came from aviation. It's a very important point that aviation was where it started from. We often hear the comment that people say, I don't need a checklist for my cleaner because my cleaner knows my place perfectly. And I think that's the wrong approach. And the reason for that is pilots obviously are very, very good at their job, and they know their job perfectly. And yet that's the very, very first application for checklists. If you've done something many, many times, there is a very, very serious risk that you'll forget very basic things because you're used to the task. So if you want something, the purpose of a checklist is to remind, or one of the purposes of checklists is to remind. So I think everyone can benefit from them, particularly if you have a cleaner who's very good at their job and who knows your place well.
I use my properly checklist when I'm doing my own turnovers, just to make sure that I don't forget anything.
Really quickly jumping ahead. The sort of main, recent theoretical framework around checklists is a book called The Checklist Manifesto. If anybody is interested in how checklists have actually come to save lives, it's a great book by Atul Gawande. I'd highly recommend it. You can find it on Amazon. But it gives you sort of a little bit of the theoretical underpinnings of why checklists are so important. And in 2015, we launched a visual checklist for hospitality. This is, by the way, this is not a presentation about Properly and our visual checklist. It's a presentation about checklists in general, and Properly is one of the ways how you can implement that. There's many others. So let's go really quickly to basics. The basic structure of an instructional checklist is you do something, i.e., for instance, you wipe to something, to an object, to a range hood, using a modifier like using stainless steel cleaner. This is quite important in that it's the modifier, it's the last part here that's actually most important to us. Cleaners know how to clean. It's the detail, like that you want them to not use something, to use a specific method. That's really what's important to us. If you start cluttering your checklist with obvious instructions, your cleaner will ignore most of the things, and you're not going to get much use out of it. Little bit further on the sort of theory of checklists. We already talked about the fact that checklists are really important to remind. There's two more topics or two more purposes of a checklist that are just as important, and I'd encourage you to explore those two, and that's explain and teach. So the reminder is the most obvious one. A checklist makes sure that you go through a process sequentially and don't forget about anything. You can also use a checklist to actually teach someone how to do something. I think that's a problem that many of us face, because to the extent that we rely on residential cleaners to do a hospitality cleaning, which is what we need them to do, there's many things that a residential cleaner wouldn't readily do. Like, for instance, they're not used to cleaning out the fridge of the half-eaten chicken of the previous guest, because that's not part of a residential cleaning. So if we want to impart specific hospitality instructions, then the function of the checklist really is to teach, not just to remind. Somewhere in the middle there is explain, and explaining is just assuming that someone actually knows the process very well but doesn't know our house. So there's many elements around our house that you may want to explain, where to find certain things, like intricacies about how a lock opens. Again, all of those are great things to put into your checklist. And
one of the advantages of a visual checklist is that you can show, because you can use a picture to show someone exactly how you want something staged.
Exactly. So we checked off why checklists make sense and what the purpose is. The second topic we'd like to talk about is how to customize your checklist. And this is a really, really important topic. When I first started with checklists, I had the most intricate checklists in the world, and they were completely useless because there was way too much detail in them. So my cleaner, who's been doing my house for a while, started looking at it. The first 15 things that she saw on it, she already knew, and then she ignored the other 30 that I put onto it. So by being too detailed and by not building a checklist that was actually specific to my audience, I lost my audience, and the whole exercise became useless. So how do you customize? There's really sort of two dimensions that we think about. On the one side of the axis, it's does your cleaner know about hospitality turnovers? So is this someone who is used to doing hospitality turnovers, or is it a residential cleaner? If the answer is yes, then you basically only need to explain. If the answer is no, you need to teach. If someone knows your place and knows hospitality turnovers, then the only purpose of the checklist is to remind. So we're basically going back to the sort of 4 checklist purposes, or the 3 checklist purposes that we discussed at the beginning. If someone knows your place and knows the process, all you need to do is you need to remind, which means you can get away with a very, very short, very, very specific checklist and just focus on the things that are typically forgotten. And this may be as much as 5 or 6 points. If you're dealing with someone that knows the process very well, but is not familiar with your place, then focus on what we call the walkthrough section, where you explain the intricacies of your house, but glance over sort of the elements of cleaning because they already know that. And if you have a combination of both, someone who is new to your place and is actually not experienced at hospitality turnovers, then you probably want to use a very detailed checklist that teaches and explains. And we'll get into a little bit more detail of what each of those would look like. The topic that I started touching a little bit on is the very worst thing you can do is focus, or one of the bad things you can do on a checklist is list too many obvious things. Vacuum all carpets is something that cleaners will do automatically. Like, that's part of every cleaning job. So if you go room by room and start by saying vacuum the carpet, unless there's something ambiguous about it, like what you tend to do is you tend to lose the message by giving, like, basically you create too much noise and you lose the signal. So for instance, what we would do is I wouldn't put into the checklist vacuum all carpets, like that's sort of a general expectation. So I wouldn't do that room by room, but I would say that I'd like them to vacuum the bed headboard in my bed, which is suede, and that's where they always miss hair or miss dust, and that's something they don't do. So I try to focus on the things that are unexpected and are specific to my place, and try not to lose the signal in the noise.
So as an example, my checklist, I have information about how to access my home, where things are located in my home, and then hospitality touches. I don't have any specific cleaning instructions because I don't have any electronics or appliances that need to be done, and I don't have anything that requires something specific. So my checklist is just how to get into my home, how to find things in my home, and then how I want things set up for my guests.
And it's the exact same for me. At the beginning, I had a very long cleaning checklist and a very short walkthrough and hospitality section. Now it's the exact opposite. Now I have very, very little on cleaning because most of the cleaning tasks are obvious, and I just focus on the special tasks that are less obvious. And I find that my checklists are much, much more effective now. When you think about customizing your checklist, think about 3 dimensions. For me, those 3 dimensions are: number 1, who's the cleaner? If you always have the same cleaner and it's an experienced cleaner, you use a very different checklist than if you have an inexperienced cleaner who's not familiar with your place. If you use the wrong checklist for the wrong cleaner, you're not going to get a good result. Like what I was trying to say at the beginning, my regular cleaner who's been doing my place for the last 10 years, if I give her a very intricate checklist, she's going to ignore it. Meanwhile, if I get a checklist, or if I get a cleaner from Handy who's never been to my place before, from any of the on-demand cleaning services, I go the other extreme and I send them an extremely detailed specific checklist. The second dimension by which I try to differentiate is who are the guests. Most importantly, what's the number of guests? So, obviously I have a different number of towels that I put out. I can configure one of the bedrooms differently depending on whether I have 4 guests or 6 guests coming. So, I customize my checklist based on that. Then of course, I customize my checklist based on specific guest preferences, like someone who doesn't like granola for breakfast, or who's requesting 2% milk as opposed to whole milk. The last dimension that I customize my checklist by is the occasion. So in my case, there's 3 different types of situations. There is a host to guest turnover, i.e. it's from Tammi and I living at the place to turning it over to Airbnb guests. And that means for us that we're changing all the pillows and duvets because we have our own and we have a different set for guests. Then there's the guest to guest turnover, i.e. a turnover in between 2 sets of guests. And then there is the next one, which is the turnover from guests back to making it our place. And there's slightly different steps in each of them. Each of those, to us, it's the exact same master checklist that we just changed slightly to reflect the different application, different cleaner, different guests, or different occasion.
And one of the ways that we've used checklists to make the guest experience really personable is based on occasion. So as an example, if I have guests who are coming to town who I know are going to be hiking, then I ask to have the hiking book put out. Or if they're coming for a birthday celebration, I'll ask for a happy birthday banner to be hung. So it's another thing that you can build into the checklist. You can build in special hospitality touches that are guest specific.
So that's basically, that's why customization is so important. If you miss your audience, or if you don't write a checklist that's specific to your audience, it's not going to work very well. So before we dive into two specific examples of checklists, the last sort of theoretical topic we wanted to cover is how to organize your checklist. The way we like to do it is we have 4 different sections. The first section we use is what we call orientation, or we now call it walkthrough. That's really for the cleaner that has never been to our place before. And in that section, we explain things like where to find anything, how many bedrooms are there, how many bathrooms are there, so they know what to expect. Where do you find the cleaning implements? Where do you find cleaning supplies? Where do you find restocking supplies? Sort of just giving them the lay of the land so they know what to expect and they know where to find everything. The second checklist section for us is preparation. Preparation are all the things that need to be done at the beginning. So there will be things like running the laundry, because there's obviously a lead time associated with that. It would be things like running the dishwasher. And one really important step that we've learned over time to appreciate is we now always ask our cleaners to take pictures when they arrive, particularly if they find something is really messy. It helps us to give better or more accurate feedback to our guests. So what we typically do is we have a very short set of 3 or 4 pictures taken before the cleaner starts the cleaning process, and then one set of pictures taken after. And it helps us sort of assess what review the guest deserves. Or it also helps us to assess why the cleaner took longer than usual, or whether there's something that we need to take care of. The third section is the cleaning section. That to us is actually the least important section, because it's the most obvious section, and we only focus on specialty items here. So specialty item for me would be how to clean my coffee machine, which is sort of a little bit of an intricate process, but it's important because if it doesn't get cleaned every week, then it won't work anymore, and then the guest ends up without coffee in the morning. And that's a very important thing. Or things like, how to clean the hot tub. I typically ask my cleaners every second week to have our table waxed, and that helps a lot because guests have a habit of never putting down coasters, and it's a hardwood table, so having it waxed helps me not having really unsightly water stains. So it's those little specialty touches that make a big difference. Lastly, the finish section to us is the hospitality part.
This is my favorite section.
Yes, and that's the longest section. I think that's what makes us superhosts. I think cleaning is table stakes, but hospitality is what gives us the 5-star ratings.
So for me, it's things like I like to have flowers from the yard put on the bedside tables. I provide light breakfast and snacks for people. And so, sorry, we're having a little interruption here on our end. And it also, some people, some hosts are very particular about how they like their home stage. So how they like the beds made, and how they like pillows arranged, and those kinds of things. We're in lots of host forums, and those are the things that we hear people talk about, that they're nervous about not being there and not doing their own turnovers because they want to make sure that those details don't get lost. So that's all in the finish section, and we think of that as the hospitality section.
Yeah, so finish section is by far the most important one. All right, so we've covered the key theoretical aspects of checklists. Really quickly, visual checklist, and what's the advantage of those? So first of all, what do we mean by a visual checklist? We simply mean something where you send a picture to show the cleaner how you'd like something to look. The easiest way to do that is just take the set of pictures that you have in your Airbnb listing or VRBO HomeAway listing, whichever platform you're using. That's we do that through our app. That's properly, and we simply basically send the cleaner a picture that shows them this is what I'd like the place to look like, and then we add tasks to it. In this case, sort of change the flowers out. We have flowers sent by. We have a whole number of delivery services in San Francisco that work on sort of 1 to 5 hour basis. So for instance, we'd order flowers on Instacart, have them delivered to the place, and then have them replaced. So if there's fresh flowers, or we ask to have the table wiped or like things replaced. And visually, it just makes it much easier, particularly if there's a language barrier. And it gives context and it gives clarity about what it is that we'd like. The second really important part of using pictures in your checklist is it allows you to give staging information, how you'd like something to look, and we just talked about that. And then thirdly, it allows you to give feedback, both give feedback to the cleaner because you see the job that they've done. And we've noticed that that's actually very, very much appreciated by the cleaners because in many cases, they're by themselves doing the entire job and they're squeezed in between one set of guests and the next set of guests, and you actually don't see the job that they did. So if they're proud of their work, they want you to see it and they want to have you comment on it. But it also allows them to give you feedback. So what we do is we sort of have a function where we allow cleaners to, or we can ask cleaners to take photos. So after they've completed a task, as they sort of check through it in our app, it'll ask them to take a photo. We have peace of mind that we weren't misunderstood and that things look the way we'd like them to look. And if the cleaner, if our helper sees anything that was missing, any supplies that are running low, anything that was broken, they can send us a problem report back, and we see exactly what happened. And we can then report it back to Airbnb and claim or hold a deposit. The verification picture that I just showed you helps us in our checklist setup to basically cover 3 topics. It's really not sort of a big brother kind of thing where we look over the shoulder of the cleaners, but it's really more for us to understand whether our instructions were clearly understood. I catch myself quite often that I think I made myself clear, but something that seemed clear to me actually wasn't that clear to someone else. So by being able to sort of visually check how something was done, it makes a big difference to me. And then the other 2 we just covered, which is there any feedback? Is there anything that the cleaner wants to let us know about the state of our place? And then most importantly, if ever there's a guest complaint and says this and this wasn't right, if we have a picture, we know it was actually done and we can address that very easily.
So there are different types of checklists. There's a basic checklist, which is just text. And this is what I used to do before I knew that this app was available. The first time I left, I was gone for 3 weeks. And so I would send messages each time someone was doing a turnover for me. So it's text is the most basic one. The next is visual, and it's a combination of text and photos. And I actually found your old manual this morning in the closet.
Yes, I know, and that's gotten fairly dusty by now.
I don't think it's been used for a while. And then the third kind is a visual interactive checklist, which includes photos, text, real-time feedback and communication. And also there's a scheduling tool that's a part of Alex's app in particular.
So what I wanted to talk about here is I'm not saying that sort of a smartphone-based app like what we're using is the only solution. Actually, you have to see what fits best for you. Each of those solutions has its advantages and disadvantages. So I've used a manual like the one you see above for a long time, where I basically just printed out pictures of what I'd like things to look like, and the cleaner can work through those. It has one very basic advantage, which is everybody can use it. It has a couple of disadvantages in that I'm not always sure that they looked at it. Sometimes it was confusing. Some cleaners looked at it or looked at half of it, but not the rest of it. But it's actually a good stopgap measure if you have problems with internet access or if you think that some of your cleaners don't have smartphones. The most basic checklist works really well for myself. So I actually have some paper checklists that I use myself where I just run through the process. And particularly when I'm in a rush, I often catch myself forgetting to lock something or not to do something. And for that, a paper checklist actually works beautifully. And then lastly, Properly, our app sort of pulls it all together and allows you to do all of that in an interactive format. But again, what I'm trying to say is Properly is one solution. There's many others, and checklist is a much, much broader topic. And you'll have to see what works best for you. So we covered how a visual checklist can work. In closing, really quickly, how do you build a checklist to make it not so daunting? So the very first checklist I built was a 1-hour exercise, and by the end of it, I really, really didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. So we came up with a couple of ideas on how to make it easier. The very, very first thing I do now is I built a basic checklist with just the Airbnb listing photos. You can use our app for that. You can use Properly for it, or you can simply print those out from your desktop. But what I noticed is just sending my cleaner a series of pictures of showing them what I'd like the place to look like is actually very, very helpful for them. And that's really, really quick. Like you can do that in as little as we have an Airbnb integration, but even if you don't want to use an app and just want to go to the website and download your pictures or take screen grabs of your pictures, they can take as little as 5 minutes. And you give your cleaner a very good idea of what you'd like things to look like. Then what I do is I'm trying to be modular about adding things to the checklist. So I did a little loop about how to clean my coffee machine, and then I did a little loop about how to clean my hot tub. And each of them took me 5-10 minutes, and with each of them, the checklist gets better. At the end of this process, I end up with a very comprehensive checklist, and then I start customizing it by basically deleting the pieces that are not relevant to certain groups of cleaners, or making small changes to it to adapt to for special situations, like do I configure the house as a 2-bedroom or as a 3-bedroom? So I basically slowly build up from a very basic checklist to a comprehensive checklist, and then I delete it back down to create different versions of that. And I figured for me that worked by far the best. Rather than sort of having to go through a huge slog of work, I work it incrementally, and I end up with something that's very useful after 10 minutes. And then I build on it, and with every week it becomes more useful.
And one of the things that's helpful is that you can start with a basic checklist, and you can customize it and then save and title each so that you have a list of different checklists for different scenarios. So I have a checklist that is, as Alex said, that might be host to guest, guest to guest, or guest to host, and then I have specific ones for different numbers of guests. So once you have those built, it makes the process very streamlined.
Right, so to summarize, this is sort of the theory, and now we go through a number of quick examples. What we wanted to convey here is checklists can save you time, they can help you communicate much better, much more effectively. They'll help you manage the details, and it's the details that give us the 5-star reviews. It's not the table stakes, the cleaning. We get the 5-star reviews because we are detail-oriented hosts. And then most importantly, it gives you peace of mind because you actually know that something was done. So that's what we tried to accomplish today. So hopefully with peace of mind, we'll all be sitting on a beach while everything runs super smoothly back at home. And we'll be sitting on a beach actually in 24 hours from now, somewhere on the South Island of New Zealand. And we have a lot of things to do between here and then. But let's quickly jump through a few examples of things that we do. So let's start with the first section, orientation walkthrough. I mean, of course, there we focus first on walkthrough, first on access. So I send a picture of my lock and then explain what the code is. Every time you see a plus, like it allows you to, when you click on it, you basically see more information. And in this case, you'd get the access code. In that section, we do things like we explain how to get in, where to find cleaning products, where to find things to restock, where to find the bottle of champagne that we asked every cleaner to put into the fridge for the next guest, where to find cardstock so they can write a handwritten note if we have someone make a reservation and we couldn't pre-prepare the note. So those are all little sort of ideas of what we use in the orientation section, in the walkthrough section.
The next section, like we talked about, is the cleaning section. And those are things that we encourage people to only focus on items that are out of the ordinary. So if there's a specific way that you want something in your home cleaned, or something that needs to be left alone, or if there's something that is a complicated, like Alex's coffee machine that requires a special kind of step-by-step cleaning, that would be an example of teaching someone how to do that. But other than that, we encourage people to leave out the things that are obvious things that people who've been, cleaning professionally for some time would know to do.
In this case, this is an example of I ask cleaners every 2 weeks. I often ask them to wipe my table with wax. And again, if you click through this, you'd see the can of wax, which can of wax to use and what cloth to use for that, and gives you specific step-by-step instructions on how to do that. Other things in orientation that we covered, that's like we talked about that. Let's go to preparation really quickly. Preparation are the three things that we like the cleaner to do before they actually start the actual cleaning job. Most importantly, one thing that we find really, really useful now is the walkthrough. That's been sort of a recent discovery for Tammi and me. We now always ask the cleaner to spend 5 minutes before they get started to actually walk through our place and take a picture of the kitchen and of every bedroom. And it sort of gives us a very good sense of what state our place is in, and then sort of send us visual feedback if anything looks out of the ordinary.
We all know that feeling of walking into our house right after after guests have stayed, and I'm always curious about how things are.
There's actually also a number of sort of cute attributes to this. We have a big chalk wall in our pantry where guests tend to write reviews. So one of the checklist item is take a picture of the reviews so we actually know what the guest wrote for us, because we're not going to be there, and then we can specifically address it when we write back to them. And it's a nice touch to actually acknowledge what they wrote. We have a magnetic board somewhere where people use magnetic poetry. So the cleaner sometimes takes a picture of that if something interesting shows up again, so we can respond to the guest and make them feel that we're connecting with them and actually they left an impression.
I had an example once. A guest left a little gift for me in a card, and I was gone for about 2 or 3 weeks after they had checked out. And when I came home, I got that. And so I felt bad that I hadn't known about that ahead of time and sent a thank you note. So that would be another example of something that could happen on a walkthrough.
Now, the two other key important things is obviously getting the laundry started and getting the dishwasher running, because those things have lead time. And we love it when the cleaner is able to clear the dishwasher. And obviously that only happens if they started right at the beginning of their job. So we make sure that, that things are sequenced the right way. Preparation items, typical preparation items are run the dishwasher, run laundry, make the beds, and then of course the quick walkthrough. Cleaning, again, as we said before, is the least important section. The general tasks, disinfecting things, vacuuming, mopping, wiping, light switches, those are things that we just state at the beginning. We don't then repeat it for every room. We just stated at the beginning that that's what we'd expect. And then we focus on just pointing out exception items.
So the finishing touches we talked about before, there are lots of ideas of things, and I'm sure that everyone who's tuning in right now, you have your own hospitality touches. So they could be things like leaving certain lights on, having the heat set at a certain temperature, flowers by the bedside, specific things that are left out for guests, food. So just thinking through all the things that are important to you and making sure that those are conveyed in your finishing section.
In our case, one of the things we do is sometimes we have last-minute reservations. So we like to actually leave a handwritten note for the guest that says, "Hey, dear John and family, like, glad that you chose our place for your wedding anniversary," or whatever the occasion might be, but something that makes them feel that we're actually talking to them. And since we're not there in person, we can actually just type that up and our cleaner will then handwrite it onto cardstock that we've got readily available. So there's a number of little tips and tricks that we have to really use the sort of this last part, the hospitality section, which we think is by far the most important one. Items in the finish section that are really important to us. Restocking is absolutely key. That's the amenities, toilet paper, tissues, thinking ahead that if we've got a big family staying for 2 weeks, there's a lot of toilet paper they end up going through, and making sure that we're prepared for that. Obviously emptying the garbage. Like what we find is we have garbage cans in every room, and some of them are a little bit hidden. So pointing out where something is actually makes a big difference, particularly if a cleaner's not used to the place. Staging is a really important point. We like to leave a few accent lights. We have LED lamps almost everywhere in the house, so the electricity consumption is minimal. But we like to have a few accent lights on, so if someone arrives late at home, like late at night, it's just so much nicer to come to a place that's slightly lit as opposed to ending up in a dark, strange place. Safety and essentials, things like explaining locks and thermostats, and then of course making sure that the house manual is out and on the kitchen counter or in a place where it can be very easily found. That's it. That's really the that's the lot of our presentation. Again, there is a number of resources that you can find at getproperly.com, including these slides, the checklist template, and then the free checklist tool. It's entirely free, so there's no cost for this. This is basically, as I said, we're working with Airbnb to distribute this widely because we think that the more we can help hosts be better hosts, the more it benefits anyone, and particularly Airbnb. So if it works for you, that's one way of doing it, and there's many other ways to build checklists, paper checklists, or anything else. So that's the end of the presentation. Adrian is now showing us some of the questions that are coming in. In the meantime, if any of you, we got lots and lots of complaints over the last few days from the Kiwis and Australians that are complaining that the timing of this is just not good for them, and we apologize, but we're heading there directly. So we will be actually doing a couple of host meetups in Melbourne, Sydney, and Auckland in the month of April. So if you're in any of those places, look out for us, and we'd love to meet you in person. Also, from April 29th through May 1st, we'll be speaking at the Vacation Rental Success Summit in Toronto. So for all of you Canadians, I'd highly, highly recommend the Vacation Rental Success Summit. It's Heather Bayer and Mike Bayer's brainchild. It's an amazing idea, and we've benefited hugely from listening to Heather and Mike's podcasts. So highly recommend it if you are in that neck of the woods, and hope to see you in Toronto. And if you're going to that, email us, and Mike send us a few $50 off coupons, and we'd be happy to share those with you. That's it. Let me move back to a live view, and let's see if I can make that work. Yeah, so here we're back. So Tammi has a few questions.
I don't have questions.
Actually, sorry.
Our attendees have questions. Hopefully we have answers.
So first question is, someone's asking, do we work for Properly? The answer is half yes, half no. Tammi does not work for Properly. Properly is my company. I'm the founder of it.
I'm volunteer of the year. What kind of electronic locks do you guys use? Alex uses an August lock. I use an old-fashioned, I have just a lock box at my home. And let's see how to explain. Actually,
on the lock question, we're getting lots of questions. I'm a complete self-professed geek. I've used tons of different locks, so I'm very, very happy to talk about that in detail. I think the short answer on electronic locks is, so far, August is the one that I prefer. That's available, I believe, in the US and Canada. There's many alternatives to it. The most important thing for electronic locks for me has been always think of plan B. They're great when they work, and 10 to 20% of the time they don't work. So it's a good sort of primary solution. The main problem that it solves for me is that it allows me to know when the guests arrive and leave, and that it allows me to give an unlimited amount of keys to the guests because there's no risk of losing keys since it's an electronic key. It'll never be the only method for me because I always come across one or two guests that have problems with their smartphone, run out of battery. So there needs to be a plan B. So that's on the question of smart locks.
Someone's asking if they can get a PDF version of this presentation. I think that's possible. I'm looking at Adrian. Yep.
Yeah, you can actually find, we will be uploading this presentation. We'll be emailing it to you, but we'll also be uploading this presentation to getproperly.com. If you scroll down to the bottom of the site, Adrian will have that up within the next 2 hours or so.
Suzanne's asking, Alex, your house size sounds similar to mine. How do your cleaners manage to get all laundry done without staying for a long time? Just this morning, we've been inventorying. First of all, we have lots of extra sets of things. So we've been inventorying this morning and doing the math about when sheets and extra laundry needs to be done. So I think a couple solutions. Having lots of sets of laundry is important. My system, the person who cleans my house when I'm away takes the laundry with them, and then they bring it back when they're doing the next cleaning. So laundry is one of those things that takes a long time that you have to sort of be creative about how to get that done. So I've used offsite. If someone takes everything to a laundromat, it's you can have it done in an hour and a half or 2 hours. But having extra sets, planning for it, there isn't really a great laundry solution.
Yeah, what I do is, again, it's mostly what I do is when I have my house is for 6 guests, so I have to turn over 3 bedrooms, which means 3 sets of sheets, and I wasn't smart enough to just use white sheets, which is obviously what we all should be doing. I have colored sheets, which means I need to run, for me, it's 5 loads of laundry, and that cannot happen in 4 hours. So what I do is I have the cleaners just do the towels, and the towels are all white, so they get through it in 2 loads. And for me, it's typically a 3.5 hour turnover, so that works. if they start right at the beginning. And then as far as the sheets and linen are concerned, I just have 3 different sets. And when I have a day in between, that's when I bring someone in to actually run through all of them.
Let's see. Someone is asking about how do you explain thermostats when you're not there? Alex and I both have a printed guest guide that has information about thermostats and how to work literally anything in our homes. But there are a couple of really great online or app tools that a couple of companies that have created an app system so that you can have all that information in an app. But we both have printed manuals for information about every aspect of our home.
Yeah, that's again, that's sort of my department. I love gadgets. So in terms of thermostats, I use Nest, which I would recommend to you. What I do is I do a couple of things. Typically, I get quite a few European guests here. So whenever I have a European guest, I will change the temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius, because I've been living here in the US for 25 years and I still can't figure out how Fahrenheit work. And then I go back when I have American guests. So that's one thing. The much more important thing is that I make sure that if I have a gap in between stays, I turn the temperature down remotely, so I'm not wasting energy. But 2 or 3 hours before the guests arrive, I bring the temperature up, and I can do all of that remotely. I can actually do it on a schedule. So when they arrive to a nice warm place, as opposed to coming in from the cold to something that looks like no one's lived in there for a while. So there's quite a few advantages of remote thermostats like Nest, and Honeywell has one. There's quite a few different types out there, but that's made quite a bit difference to me. Also, if no one's staying at the house for a week and it's rainy, sort of the house can get moist. So it's nice to be able to run the thermostat when it's required. Similar topic along those lines. I also have my my smoke alarms connected, and the main purpose of that is, it sort of seems to be a law of nature that smoke alarms always run out of battery in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning and start beeping and waking everyone up. So this tells me like a good time in advance when that's about to happen, so I can change the batteries, and makes a big difference to the guests and to me.
Suzanne said, I use printed info on thermostats, etc., but have you considered using a tablet or such for instructions? So that was one of the things that I was referencing. So Coral Life and Hostfully are there more companies that we know of that you can create an app that you can send to your guests ahead of time with all of those instructions, including information about your neighborhood, restaurants, and that information is in the list of resources that we'll send.
Yeah, that's one way. I like the idea about using a tablet. That's actually one thing that I do with Properly. There's very cost-effective tablets now. One tablet we like a lot is the Fire tablet by Amazon. You can get that, depending on the time of the year, you can get it for anywhere from $35 to $50. And it's actually a very nicely done tablet. So we use that both for guest guides, for neighborhood guides, and we also use it for Properly. So if there's a cleaner who doesn't have a smartphone, we just leave a tablet behind and they can use the tablet, and it works like with all the functionalities. So they can take pictures, they see instructions. But for thermostats, again, for me, by far the easiest method is to set the thermostat up in such a way so the guest doesn't have to do anything to make sure that the house is warm and everything's prepared.
Gabriel's asking, what is the minimum time in between hosts that you can manage getting everything done in time before the next check-in? I would guess, did we go offline? Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry. There's there's I think.
For me personally, I think it can be done in 2. You good? I think it can be done in 2 hours, but that makes me very nervous, whether I'm doing it myself or someone's doing it for me. So I would recommend 4 hours. I think my checkout time is noon and my check-in time is 4. But one of the things that I do is I know when I'm traveling, if I get into a city or a place early, I'd like to be able to go and get checked in right away. And on the other end, if I'm leaving town later, I'd like to be able to stay and have a late checkout. And I know that hotels are not, sometimes they're accommodating, but it's a little bit limited. So I always ask my guests ahead of time what time they're checking in and what time they're leaving, so that and it seems like it always works perfectly, that if I have a guest who's coming into town and wants to check in early, the the previous guest happens to have an early flight. And so I ask that information so that I can schedule that and give people extra time in my home. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for me, it's the same. For me, it really depends how big your house is. My house is 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. So 4 hours is really the minimum the minimum time between sets of guests. And I'm really, really cutting it close.
And that's if you have extra.
That's assuming that I have a second set of everything. So 4 hours is the minimum set for me. In that case, I have to make absolutely sure that by 12 o'clock, the first set of guests has left and the second set of guests does not arrive before 4 o'clock. Luckily, I do have same-day terminals quite a bit, but luckily, typically, either someone ends up arriving late, so I have a little bit more time. But 4 hours is really, really cutting it close for me.
And someone is sharing information that with regard to local recommendations, things to do in your city, restaurants, there are a couple of new apps that are coming out. One's called Locally.
Locally, so L-O-K-E-L-Y, and that recommendation is from Daniel, and then Nomly, that's N-O-M-L-Y. There's lots and lots of local applications. We quite like them. There's another interesting application that we'd recommend, and we have no affiliation with them, and it's called Detour. So Detour is an audio guide to your city. We got some really good guest reviews some really good reviews from guests that have used it. It's available for a handful of cities right now, but I think they're expanding. So there's quite a few options for showing people your city and local attractions.
Someone asked if we use buzzers to let guests in remotely.
So I've considered it. I said, as I said at the beginning, I'm testing a door cam right now. I like to draw the line at cameras. So obviously we have no cameras anywhere in the house. That's creepy, and I'd never do that. Door cams, I think it really depends. I know there is some guests, some hosts that have had big issues with guests not doing what they said they would do, i.e. there's 2 guests registering and then 17 guests showing up. Door cams can actually help you a lot with that. Personally, I haven't had a lot of problems with that, so I'm still on the fence on whether I'm going to keep my door cam or not. But the one thing in terms of letting people in remotely that you'll always have to remember, it's a great thing to have, but do not rely on it. I do have a remote way of opening my door via August, and I'd say 70% of the time it works and 30% of the time it doesn't. So it's a nice to have, but it's not something I'd ever rely on.
I think
I think we're just out of time. We're almost up on the hour. So thank you very much for joining us on what here in San Francisco is a pretty rainy or starting to clear up Monday morning. Thank you very much. Hope we were able to share some ideas with you. Any ideas that you have, please let us know. We always like to act as a bridge between hosts, to pass information from hosts to the rest of the community. And any of you in Australia or New Zealand, we'll hopefully see you soon in person, and we'll be back here in San Francisco in April and then in Canada at the beginning of May. Thanks very much, and have an awesome day. Happy hosting.
Bye-bye.